So Matt, let's go back to you here, and I guess allegedly a denial of service attack wiped out data.
But
sometimes you really want to wipe out data, and maybe it doesn't get wiped out all the way.
So this is interesting. There was some research done on the actual efficacy of Android's data wipe functionality. So when you do a factory reset, you're supposed to be able to wipe all the data off your phone. You basically assume at that point that it's blank and everything you need to worry about is gone. Some researchers took a look at that and found that that's not necessarily the case. Now this affects versions of Android, I want to say from 2.3 to 4.2. It seems that it seems a bit varied between the different platforms and how each manufacturer is either more or less susceptible to this. And I think it has to do with the flash memory in the devices. Now, when you read and write to flash, it's not the same as reading and writing to a hard drive, because there's internal logic on a flash chip that does something called wear leveling, which basically if you're trying to write to a chip more than once, it'll sort of manage certain sectors and cells of the flash so that some of it doesn't get overtaxed or overused.
Right.
It's for the health of that flash drive. And to properly wipe a flash drive, you've really got to take extra steps to subvert that logic. And some manufacturers, the wipe is working or is not working based on the drivers that are available. So if you tell the drive, wipe yourself, and you're not making the right calls, you may not actually wipe the drive.
Yeah.
Another interesting finding is that one of the things people would recommend for this is to say encrypt the entire drive and somehow lose the key, which is great, except that they found that the decryption key, the file itself, is one of the few things that doesn't get wiped when you wipe the Android phone, which is a little bit terrifying. By itself, that key is encrypted and supposedly protected. But if you take that file offline and run a cracking against it, you can eventually recover that key and then recover the rest of everything.
All right.
Now, the best solution they suggested, and it's still not a perfect solution because of this offline attack, is to encrypt your phone with a very long key phrase, as long as you can. Because that'll at least give you more time against an attack like that.
Right.
But it's, again, still not perfect. There's also an interesting related paper. Ars Technica wrote up a little bit about both. And the other one is about antivirus, like anti-theft mechanisms that are tied into properly or mobile antivirus. And that same situation where they're not properly using the APIs shows up there as well.
Yeah.
So both are good reads. They're a little bit dense, but I recommend them.
Yeah, interesting topic. The whole notion, disk drives also have hysteresis associated with them. That's why they ask you to overwrite them a number of times to be able to basically wipe things out. But that's the idea of kind of reversing things and bringing it back. Writing to actually even just dynamic memory, dynamic semiconductor memory, even though it's not intended to have any fixed memory associated with it. The flash memory is actually kind of the same principle. Flash memory, you're just kind of sucking in some electrons into an insulator barrier. And when they get stuck in there, that represents a 1 effectively. And so when you try to suck those electrons out, I'm using my own layman's term. But when you pull those electrons out of there, not all of them necessarily come out, and so you could have some remnants of that left. I'm not exactly sure if that's what they're doing here, but that's that whole notion, you can only really kind of penetrate that oxide so many times, that insulator so many times, and that's one of the reasons they have to kind of distribute the load across the thing, because once your memory slots start going, it's not much of anything. You end up having to buy a new device.
Yep. The first paper that Matt was talking about, part of it was that they weren't properly using the API either. And it was up through, it was 2.3 through 4.3, and 4.4 and 5, supposedly they've tightened some of this stuff up.
Good.
So hopefully it actually does a better job on the newer devices, but yeah, it's part of it was improperly using the API. It wasn't just that that it didn't get all the spots, although there was some of that too. But if you're removing applications, you need to make sure you're removing all the data that goes with it and that kind of thing as well.
Yep. And you know, despite the flaws, you know, there are probably oogles of more cases where the devices just haven't been wiped, and that's where information gets lost or, you know, compromised, than a case where the wipe wasn't quite perfect.
That's true.
I don't remember too many cases. Well, I guess there are cases where data has been recovered from drives. It's usually because you know, most of the recovery cases. I'm not sure how familiar the audience is with this, but most of the time when data gets recovered from drives, for example, in forensic, it's not because it's been wiped and they're basically restoring it from, you know, some remnants that are left in there. Usually, it's because the only thing that's been overwritten is the indexing to the files, and the file data is still there.
Pointing to it, right?
And that's a completely different situation than a case where it hasn't been wiped perfectly.
Right, absolutely. It's much easier to the basic delete functions on, you know, on most computers doesn't actually delete the data. It just deletes the pointers that say this is where the data is located. And so it's still out there in unallocated space most of the time.
Right. Absolutely.
So I got to use sdelete.
sdelete. Yep.
Yeah, there is an sdelete function.
Secure delete.
Secure
Yep.
delete.
To basically make sure it gets overwritten.